We are the New York City Anti-Violence Project. We are a community of survivors, advocates, counselors, organizers. We are LGBTQ, HIV affected, and allies. 40 years ago, we came together to respond to biased and violent attacks against our community members, to support each other, and to organize. We connected to survivors through a single landline, then pagers, then mobile phones. Throughout our history, we have fought to hold those who harm accountable and push those with power to see us, hear us, believe us, and serve us. We have gathered to heal, and we have grown. Now, our bilingual hotline runs 24 hours a day, and through new technology, we connect to survivors in over 200 languages. With your support, we will reach even more survivors through every means possible. We know that the violence that impacts us comes from outside of and within our communities. We recognize that institutions that dehumanize us will not bring about justice, and everyone has the right to heal and feel safe. Today, those who attack us are emboldened. They want to build more walls, construct more cages, push more and more of us to the margins, and divide our communities. Yet at the Anti-Violence Project, we are opening doors and growing stronger. We are building a different future, free from hate and violence. A just world is our calling.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Alicia Ray, and before we start our program, I would like to introduce Abby Small as a representative of Senator Brad Hoylman's office for a brief presentation. Brad Hoylman is currently the only out gay member of the New York State Senate, and last year he helped get agenda passed after many years out. Senator Hoylman is also the sponsor of the Hate Crimes Analysis and Review Act, as well as a bill to stop police profiling community members for walking while trans.
Thank you. Fabulous introduction, and hit most of the points I was going to cover, but again, Senator Hoylman is on his way back from Albany. He wishes he could be here with all of you tonight. And what's very cool is, in honor of this event tonight, and in honor of the 40th anniversary of AVP, we put together a proclamation from the New York State Senate honoring the New York City Anti-Violence Project upon the occasion of its 40th anniversary, which I think we all agree is worth celebrating. I'm going to be very brief with this, but whereas the New York City Anti-Violence Project was founded by community activists in the streets of Chelsea in 1980, and has for decades proven itself as a dedicated advocate for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and HIV-affected communities throughout New York City. And whereas our city benefits from organizations like the New York City Anti-Violence Project because of the work its members do to build trust with survivors of violence by showing up for them every single day, and you guys do a lot of great things. I'm not going to read them all out right now. Proclaimed that New York State Senator Brad Hoylman recognizes that in the New York City Anti-Violence Project we have an organization worthy of our highest esteem, and be it further proclaimed that New York State Senator Brad Hoylman, upon the occasion of this wonderful anniversary, declared January 23rd, 2020 to be the New York City Anti-Violence Project Appreciation Day in New York State's 27th Senate District. So thank you guys all for the wonderful work you're doing. I'm happy to present this to them. Thanks, everybody.
You don't have to run on stage.
welcome to our first anniversary event, one of several that you will be invited to this year and also next year. We are going to spend some time honoring our past and looking forward to the future. And today, we know that violence is still pervasive in our country, in our community. We know that it's a time when AVP needs to be visionary and bold. And so we decided that one of the ways that we wanted to celebrate our 40th anniversary year is to bring the community some bold and visionary ideas through what we're calling a series of courageous conversations. And we're starting these courageous conversations right where AVP started 40 years ago, looking at hate violence. What's happening with hate violence and what do we need to do to prevent it. So we're so excited about this conversation today. We're going to have two parts tonight. Our first part is a conversation that I'm going to have with two of AVP's founders. We have Arthur Goodman and Thomas Von Forrester, and they're going to talk about how it all started, what was going on, and what we've learned from our history. And then we're going to bring up a fabulous panel of leaders who are going to be talking about our hate violence work now and into the future. And that discussion is going to be moderated by our board member, Amara Jones of Trans Lash. And she's going to be talking to Mohammed Q. Amin from the Equality Caribbean Project. Give it up for all of them. And Garcia from HRA New York. HRA from AVP. And HRA from the Bay Group. So a couple of things you need to know about today's conversation. We want you all to get involved. We are going to have one Q&A at the end of both conversations. So that means that as you're thinking of questions throughout the night, you have note cards on your seat and pens. Please write them down and hold up your hands. And we have two folks, Virginia and Miles. Raise your hands. Where are you? In the back. Who are going to come around, collect your questions, and then make sure we get them to our panelists for later for our Q&A. So that's number one. Number two, we want to make sure that we're having this conversation on social media as we're having it in this room today. So we are live streaming to Facebook. So welcome everybody who's watching us on Facebook. And we want everybody to get involved. So share your ideas and your thoughts using hashtag #AjustWorld tonight. All right? Okay, let's begin. So, welcome Arthur and Thomas. I feel personally so honored to be able to have this conversation with two of the many people who were a part of making this organization, coming up with the idea, building it, making it strong, and here we are today, 40 years later. So I just want to start by asking you all to tell us a little bit about the social and political climate in 1980. What was happening when AVP was founded? What was going on in the community?
Well, can you hear me? Sorry, very cliche. Chelsea had the Chelsea Gay Association, which was a very odd organization. I founded it, I take credit for that. Most of the people who dispute me are dead. So. And I came from the Anti-Violence Project, not the Anti-Violence, the Gay Activists Alliance, which was run by parliamentary procedure. So, as you imagine, I wanted an organization that was as disorganized as possible. So, we had an organization where basically the idea was to get as many people as possible in the basically let people do what they were called to do, sort of like a Quaker meeting, instead of arguing about it.
In cybernetics, it's called the self-organizing system. That's what we were. Yeah.
Yes. So in 1980, the report, I was just looking at the archives of the newsletters, and on May 9th, 1980, we called an emergency meeting because there had been a lot of anti-gay violence on 9th Avenue between 15th and 21st Street. Basically, white boys going to and from the bars. And they were getting beaten up by people who lived in the neighborhood, people who lived in Jersey. There was a lot going on. And most of it was not getting, it was word of mouth, it was not getting reported to the police. The police didn't really understand that there was a problem because nobody was reporting it to them. So, were you there at that meeting?
Yeah, and part of the problem was that when it was reported to the police managed to file these things very carefully away in a circular file that was never accessed. And so the police knew nothing about anti-gay violence because, after all, they could report it about. So educating the police became one of the very important things that the Trustee Association and the Anti-Violence Project did in the first couple of years. We would have meetings with police officers who try to point out to them that this is a sizable contingent of people that we have to deal with, and they deserve protection as much as anybody else.
And tell us about in the beginning days, what were, in addition to educating the police, what were some of the other things that ABP and the Chelsea Gay Association did? I know at some point the hotline came in. How did that happen?
Well, we advertised that people could call into our telephone number, which was an answering service at that time, and could get help. They could get people counseling them sort of informally. They could get people going with them to the police. They could get people going with them to the courts. When if things got to that point, they could get people going to them to victim services agency. They didn't have to do it alone. And we needed to collect the information.
At this point, this was all volunteer, right?
Totally volunteer.
In fact, it's centered around two indefatigable volunteers, Jay Watkins and Russell Martin, who really took leadership, and the people who were sort of checking in for messages from the answering services 24 hours a day, and making sure that people went to the police station with these people. So they did a lot of organizing, and I think ultimately burned themselves out doing that. But the real impetus for starting this was Jay and Russell.
And I know, Thomas, you did the newsletter, right?
Yes. Yeah, I would, once I joined the CGA, which was a couple of years after it started, I had just moved to New York and was working as an editor for a scientific publication. And I thought, editing is something that I do. Why don't I volunteer and do this, since there wasn't really anybody from month to month who was willing to take charge of the newsletter. And so I did part of that, and with a couple of other people, put out the newsletter.
Can you share a little bit about how the newsletter and getting the information out is also sort of a part of the work of organizing the community and also getting other people educated about what was happening?
Well, one of the things we emphasize with the newsletter is that even though it was the Chelsea Gay Association, Chelsea was, to our point of view, not a geographical entity, but a mental entity, and that you could live in any part of the city and be a member of the
Chelsea State of Mind.
Yes. And so we had lots of people coming to the meetings and sharing whatever they knew about their neighborhoods and helping organize parties and things like that. But also then, once ADP became an important part of the activities, they helped anti-violence stuff. So it was, you know, the newsletter and the monthly meetings, plus all the little projects that grew out of those monthly meetings that weren't all necessarily political. For instance, one of the fairly frequent attendees at the monthly meetings was a fellow named Richard Foltz, who wrote plays and wrote songs. And we managed to get other people in the CGA involved because they were coming to put on plays. And so there was a whole theater project about the Chelsea Gay Association, as well as Richard always wrote these amazing Christmas songs, many of them quite melancholy and not really something you want to send to people for Christmas, but still, there's he did. And several people organized Richard doing concerts of his songs. So, it was a very sort of amorphous, as I say, self-organizing system. Somebody wanted to do something, well, go ahead and do it. And we would put space in the newsletter, and Louis Fuloni would do these wonderful little drawings around the things appropriate to whatever event was going on. And Richard folks was a typesetter, so we type some things, and we would get it all squared away and make it look nice and send it out to lots of people. And
I think it's important. I just was looking at the newsletters, and we got up to 1,200 people on the mailing list, which sounds like nothing today. But when we realized that was mainly in one zip code, and going out to a lot of people, and hitting all the elected officials, and being visible, and the number of people who were reading it, probably in bars or whatever, but were too scared to get on a mailing list that said gay and lesbian. That was a lot, and it had a huge impact. And yeah, go ahead.
I don't think we could have handled more than that because the mailings were all done in my apartment. These ugly, what I call picking stuffing parties, where we're really stuffing those tables there.
And tell me about when it was time for ADP to actually become its own entity. What spurred that and what did that look like?
I take responsibility for that. As we have been so nostalgically saying, CGA was this amorphous organization, and it was obvious, or it was becoming obvious that we were giving consistent services, and there was a need, and the need was not going to go away. This wasn't a one-time thing. And we were not the organization that was we didn't have the structure to provide proper services, or even improper services, as it was, consistently. And it was a source of tension, and I realized, oh, this needs to be another organization. So I said so, and the Anti-Violence Project went off, and luckily that was intersecting with a change in, this is where politics comes into things, and you have to always follow politics. The Senate lines were changed for New York State Senate, and Dick Godfrey needed to get money into the gay community, into Chelsea, to show that he was interested, and he was working on the domestic violence, and he was chair of the state committee. And he got, God knows how, $6,000, which was a huge amount of money to us, to the project. and that had to go, again, politics, it couldn't go to organization that had gay in the title. So there had to be a front Chelsea organization, which then passed through the money. That was the beginning of state aid. I would be curious if you know offhand about how much we're getting now from the state. Well, that's always. I'm sure it's a bit more than 6,000. But we have to start somewhere. And I warned Beverly, we're running out of time, but I warned Beverly that there's this quote from Margaret Mead I came across a couple of years ago. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. It is the only thing that ever happens. We were a rowdy bunch back in the day. But that if the organization is around in another 40 years, that it looks very different, one way or another.
I can only second that, but it would be great if the organization doesn't need to exist.
Talking to Mike.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can only second what Arthur said and say that my hope is that in 40 years this organization is not needed in its current form, and I hope that it's actually a lot sooner. But how to get there, good luck.
Your turn.
You all can take your seats and we will bring you back up for questions in a little bit. So, before our next panel comes up, I want to just share a little bit of information about our 40th anniversary and our plans. Again, we are so excited that you all are here to kick this off with us. So I wanted to just tell you a little bit about what we're thinking. We're launching a campaign for our 40th anniversary. And we have a big goal that 40 years later, almost nonstop, I don't think there's been a time when our hotline wasn't running from that early beginnings, where it was the phone line of the Chelsea Gay Association answered by an answering service, and 2 volunteers were responsible for returning all the calls, talking to everyone, and then grew and grew. And today our hotline is 24 hours, it's bilingual. And we moved from a landline to pagers to now folks use their cell phones. But it's time for another evolution of our hotline. We have a very ambitious goal to modernize our hotline and bring in new technology so that we can add texting and chatting features so that the hotline can be not only accessible whenever people want us, but however people want us and need us. We want the hotline to be literally at people's fingertips all the time. So we are working to raise $1 million above our regular budget to make that happen. So in the next year and a half, we're going to be asking you to help us go out and bring in more people who can be a part of this effort. Today, you can start to get involved. And so everyone got a bag on their chair. In your bag is a folder. You don't have to get it out now, but I'm telling you that you have in your folder a couple of really important documents about our 40th anniversary. One gives you a little bit of a rundown of our story and more about why we need to raise this $1 million. And in that, you will also see a form where you can make a pledge to our 40th anniversary campaign. So I encourage folks to think about it. If you know you can make a pledge, please fill that out tonight, and you can hand it back over to folks at the table. We are also looking to grow our 40th anniversary committee. Everybody who's here who's on our 40th anniversary committee, can you raise your hand? Thank you all. These are our 40th anniversary ambassadors. And we want that group to grow even more. I will step aside so you can see all the names. And if you are not sure about a pledge tonight, but you know you want to help us reach this goal, you can also fill out a form in your packet to join our 40th anniversary committee. So please consider doing both of those things. Now, I'm going to turn this conversation over to our next panel, led by Amara Jones. And I'm going to get out of the way.
Here's like walking through the thing. It's very narrow, very tricky. My name is Amara Jones. I am on the board of AVP. I am also the founder and creator of Translash. You can find out more about Translash at translash.org. But tonight we are here to talk to an amazing panel about the incredible work and the passion and the dedication that goes on to continuing to fulfill the incredible legacy of the origins of the movement for anti-violence and to end violence. And we're going to continue that conversation, bridging where we ended sort of in the 80s and bringing it all the way forward to the 2000s and beyond in terms of where we're going and what the road ahead may look like. So let me first introduce this very august, to use an old word, panel. The first is Adesia Ray, who is with the Anti-Violence Project. The next is Biene Garcia, who is with Make the Road. The next is Mohammed Q. Amin, who is with the Caribbean Equality Project. And the last is Avershi Bayed, who is with the Bayed Consulting Group, this project, right? Yeah, all of the above. So give a round of applause for them, as well as some wonderful students. I don't know if you can see and Amin particularly, so give a round of applause for that. You didn't think I was going to come? It's a queer event, of course. I wanted to start out with you first, Vashi, to sort of to bridge us from sort of where we left off in the 80s and to the late 2000s. And there are two particular questions that I have. I think one, what's interesting is the role of women in this movement for anti-violence, right? In the 1980s, what was the response then in the 90s? And we know that women, of course, lesbians in particular, played a really important role in the fight against HIV/AIDS, which is not routinely discussed and documented, but were hugely important in that. So I'm wondering what the parallels may be in anti-violence. And secondly, it seemed as if after the initial eruption of violence in the 80s and the response to that AVP was a part of here and across the country, that another turning point was, of course, the murder of Matthew Shepard. And so on those two notes, I'm just wondering what your thoughts might be in helping to bring us forward.
Sure, thank you. It's a great question. And before I answer it, though, I was thinking about the history and the story. And, you know, in my own experience, and I got involved in the queer movement in the late 70s as a activist in Boston, and then moved to DC and worked there as a volunteer, and then eventually at the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force and other places. But at the time, you know, that I'm starting out, it was a lot of protest. The anti-violence movement was galvanized by incidents of violence, often committed by police. Raids and arrests at cruising grounds, attacks at gay bars, outrageous treatment of all queer people all the time, everywhere across the country, and that was one of the galvanizing issues, as our founders shared too, was police violence. But there was also, interpersonal violence that was happening that was kind of underground at that time, I would say, and less talked about. And there was also just bashers. And for women, there was the constant layer, as there is for all women, including trans women, of gender-based violence, of attacks on our vulnerability or perceived vulnerability because of our gender or gender expression. And that's a constant for me in my life. Violence, the threat of violence, the fear of violence, don't walk down that street because of violence, getting, violated in some way. That's a very shared experience. So I think my answer to you, so in terms of the movement history, we went from that kind of context to starting to have to, actually the first stage of the movement was documenting the fact that violence was happening to us and naming it and organizing to get every institution to pay attention to it. I mean, nobody wanted to pay attention to anti-gay violence, to hate violence, to violence against our communities. It was a real effort to get that. And that's where the task force, when they started the 800 toll-free hotline, it started to collect data. That's why the anti-violence projects in CUAV, in San Francisco, and the other violence projects that sprung up around the country did community-based data collection to prove that the violence existed. Then we moved into education, then we moved into services, then we moved into sort of policy interventions, which were mixed. Some people wanted bad policy interventions, some people wanted, I'm wandering all over the place. But when I look at the history, that's what I see. But to your specific question about women, I think we were in a parallel movement in many ways when I started out. The anti-violence movement, there was an active violence against women movement. Take Back the Night marches. I was part of a community organizing group that was like organizing green light safe houses in communities in Boston to which women who felt violated could go if they were being followed or harassed or if they were in an abusive relationship. It was a real neighborhood strategy of intervention. And then there was this other gay movement, which was really focused around bars, but I think it was led by, in my experience, it was led by men a lot. It wasn't yet co-gender. It became that in the 80s and in the late 80s and 90s as the whole movement became co-gender, motivated in large part by AIDS, which brought us together.
And for you, do you think that, is there a before and after Matthew Shepard, of course, the gay man who was beaten to death?
I think for the general straight public there was, because that was an incident that it was like the Rock Hudson moment around AIDS, right? The crisis was happening in our communities. I can name a dozen people that were also murdered, dozens of people who were also murdered, and that galvanized local communities, and other things happened. But Shepard captured it was the first time it was on Time magazine cover, I think, and stuff like that. So it was a huge, what's that? Yeah, Julio Rivera, I think of Rebecca White and Claudia Brenner. It was a real moment in the late 90s around Rebecca White was murdered by this guy who stopped them when they were camping. There were like all these other incidents that happened all over the country, and in those communities you can go to and name key people who galvanized that community, whose death and murders or galvanized those communities. So yes, Shepard was important for a national conversation, but it really wasn't the first of these.
One of the things that strikes us about where we are in anti-violence, I think it's really important to note, is that violence against LGBTQ people is not a thing of the past, right? So even though ABP has been around for 40 years, it's not as if, as we were discussing before, that the problem has gone away. And in many respects, depending on how you measure it, but you can say regardless, that in many ways our community is facing historic levels of violence, hate violence, and that has all happened since 2016. And so in terms of being dramatic, of course the violence has been consistent, but breaking records since 2016. And that would not be at the 35th anniversary of ABP, that would not have been something that would have been predicted in terms of where we are and where things are. And in terms of the current shape of violence and how it looks, I think it's really important to turn to you, Danny, and also Mohammed, because we know that in so many ways that our community is blacker and browner, and that's where the violence in many ways has shifted, particularly for trans women of color, for Black trans women, of course it's murders, for increasingly Latina and Latinx trans women. It's the intersection of violence, immigration status, and the current backlash, which shapes people's experience. And so, in reality, that's what drove you, that intersection of all these issues. These current issues are what drove you into the current state of activism. So I'm wondering if you wanted to share some particular parts of your own personal story which brought you to the present moment, and then if you can talk about what you see as the biggest challenges right now from where you sit in terms of anti-violence. Oh, and also, let me just mention, we are going to be using an English translator for her, even though her English is flawless, and she could, you're sick, no, okay, whatever. I've been on other panels with you, and you've been as fluent as anybody, but there are these to choose. So, but she'll also be using the translator, so I just wanted to let everyone know that there'll be a slight delay in terms of relaying that information to you.
So Spanish is my first language, and I feel more comfortable speaking my language. My name is Bene García. Soy una persona trans que emigró a los Estados Unidos a la edad de 14 años, escapando transfobia en México. Al llegar a este país, yo pensaba que iba a ser mi vida diferente, iba a ser aceptada, iba a ser poder expresar mi género como yo quisiera, vestirme como yo quería. pero la realidad fue diferente. Lo que los fundadores de ABP compartieron, que hace 40 años la violencia existía, ¿verdad? Yo tengo 28, 29, oh my God, estoy compartiendo mi edad. Y todavía no ha cambiado, sigue igual o peor.
Let me just pause you there and let them translate that.
So, my name is Vianega Garcia. I am a trans woman who came to the United States at the age of 14 years old, escaping violence and transphobia from Mexico. And coming here, I thought the situation would be different. I thought that I would be accepted here, that I would be able to express my gender and dress the way that I wanted to, and be myself. But the reality was very different. And just as the founders of ABP mentioned earlier, 40 years ago, violence was very present, and I am currently 28, 29. Oh my God, I'm sharing my age. 28, 29, and things are very much still the same.
Recientemente, en junio, antes 50 años, cumpliendo 50 años después de Stonewall, fui atacada con gas pimienta por dos personas súper transfóbicas, personas que odian a las personas que están haciendo trabajo sexual por sobrevivencia. De la nada simplemente me empezaron a decir cosas homofóbicas, transfóbicas, diciendo que iban a llamar a la policía porque yo estaba haciendo trabajo sexual. Yo sabiendo que no estaba haciendo trabajo sexual, sino estaba trabajando en un documental. Y me echaron pepper spray en los ojos. Cuando paramos a la policía no quiso hacer el reporte inmediatamente. La persona se puso muy agresiva con la policía y esa fue la única razón por la cual ellos detuvieron a la persona. Para mí siempre está presente como una persona de color de que la vida de las mujeres trans en manos de la policía no importa.
So recently, this June, during the celebration of the 50th anniversary of Stonewall, I was attacked with pepper gas by a transphobic person. Transphobic and very ignorant people who hate others for participating in sex work or taking part in sex work for their survival. They were saying very homophobic and transphobic things to me, threatening to call the police on me, saying that they were going to call the police because I was doing sex work, and I was not doing sex work. I was working on a documentary. But they decided to pepper spray me, and when they called the police refused to file a report immediately, and they got very aggressive with the police, and that was the only reason they were detained. And so, for me, it's very present that as a person of color, trans people's lives do not matter at the hands of the police.
Como se hace camino en Nueva York, nosotros hemos estado registrando los casos de violencia en contra de las personas trans y personas LGBT. Hasta ahorita llegamos 31 casos de crímenes de odio en las cuales los atacantes han utilizado botellas, cadenas, martillos, armas de fuego, arma blanca, entre otros instrumentos. Es realmente muy triste ver cómo la comunidad indocumentada específicamente tiene miedo de ir a la policía a hacer una denuncia, a hacer un reporte, porque me ha tocado ir con ellos a los recintos locales 110, 115, y lo único que hace la policía es reírse de uno. ¿Por qué estás saliendo a esta hora? ¿Por qué estás vestida así? Ese no es tu género. ¿Por qué te haces llamar Juanita si tu nombre es Carlos? Realmente es triste ver cómo las personas que se suponen tienen que estarnos protegiendo a nosotros no lo hacen y solamente se burlan de nosotros. Para muchas personas indocumentadas, al igual que yo en algún momento lo estuve, Ser sobreviviente de un crimen de odio te puede ayudar a arreglar tu estatus migratorio, pero desafortunadamente porque la policía no actúa y no sabe cómo lidiar con ese tipo de casos, es muy difícil hacer como un caso de hate crime, un crimen de odio.
So at Victor, New York, we have been documenting violence against trans and the LGBT community as a whole. And since we've been doing this, we have recorded 31 cases of hate crimes where victims have been attacked with a variety of weapons, including bottles, chains, guns, or knives, and among other things. And it's very, something that sticks out is that undocumented people in particular are afraid to go to the police to file a complaint or a report for the violence that they have experienced. And I have myself had to accompany some folks to some precincts, 110th, 115th, and the police, what they do is they laugh at us and they say, why are you dressed like that? What are you doing out at this time of night? Why are you calling yourself Juanita when your name is Carlos? And it's just really sad to see that the people who are supposed to be protecting us are there just laughing at us. And especially for undocumented people, as I was at a point in time, we are, on top of that, victims of hate crimes, and that for us to be afraid to carry out, to report, is very difficult. And the police, being a victim of a hate crime can actually can lead to some of us being able to adjust our status in this country, like our legal status in this country. But unfortunately, because police don't know how to handle cases of hate violence and hate crimes against us, we are not oftentimes unable to carry out that paperwork to make it happen.
Hold on for just a minute, because I'm gonna actually, be organic, because something that you said actually made me think of asking Adesha a question. We'll come back to Mohammed, and that is, I mean, in all of these, in almost everything that everyone has said, from the beginning of ABP to the current situation, to Biani talking about what's happening, weeks ago. There's been this problematic, or this complicated, I guess I should say, relationship with the police in terms of getting police to take us seriously, to respect us, and then to do the right thing. And I know that there is a huge conversation right now in terms of where we go in the response to violence, whether or not police continue to be a part of what we think is the solution. And whether or not the overall response of the government, the state, the carceral state of responding to violence, even if they do take the situation seriously, the response is to lock the person up and maybe exacerbate other problems within distressed communities, if that's the way to go overall. So I'm wondering if you can talk about where the anti-violence movement is overall in terms of its interaction with police and the way that we see police as a part of the solution or not, and the overall response to violence through a governmental lens.
I think that's changed a lot over the 40 years of ABP's history, and I think it's something that I feel really proud that at ABP we're wrestling with in this very active way. In the early days of ABP, there was this push to make sure that the police would take violence against LGBTQ people seriously and investigate claims of hate violence and look into it and help protect our community. And today, as the movement rightfully becomes much blacker and browner, folks are continually bringing up that police are not a source of safety to many people in our communities, and we need to look at different ways to produce safety together as a community in a way that does not rely on policing and does not rely on carceral systems. And particularly, thinking about the ways that folks have been talking about this, that violence that happens to people in the LGBT communities is interpersonal, is directed at individuals, and it happens internally in the community. It happens from people outside of our communities, and it comes also from the state, the state that is supposed to be protecting us, and that includes not just from police, but also from hospitals, from other healthcare institutions, from institutions that are supposed to help people get access to shelter. All those spaces are also sources of violence. And that's something that's really important for us to look at. And particularly for hate violence, one of the things that I want to bring in to complicate this conversation also is that through the work that we've been doing as part of the National Coalition of Anti-Violence Programs and the 20 years worth of data that we've been collecting around hate violence and interpersonal violence, is that we actually see that a lot of the violence that people experience comes from people they know. So, and that's even when talking about hate violence. So hate violence is not just like a stranger danger thing that is happening to people in the streets. This hate violence happens in people's housing situations, with their families, with coworkers and employers, in healthcare settings. And so it's really important to really look at like what we're talking about when we're talking about violence, and that it's coming from inside our own houses, even when we're talking about hate violence. And so, and we've been really thinking much more about how do we create these kinds of safety in community and not rely on police. And we've moved away from the idea that if we can just educate the police enough, they will be able to help us better, and moving towards the idea that we can create safety in our own communities.
One of the interesting things that you bring up is how actually the response to violence that we have now is not only about strangers who attack, one dimension of violence, right, which is a stranger attacking someone and then trying to get the state to intervene. It's now the full range of responsive violence. That is to say, sometimes the state may be origin of violence, sometimes strangers may be origin of violence, sometimes you're in a living situation and intimate partner violence being the drivers of violence. So in some ways, as we go along, it seems that the mission of ABP is actually more complicated. As time goes, it's not easier. And a part of that complication, as well as something that you mentioned in terms of how the changing nature of Black and Brown communities is shifting the issues around that. And so I wanted to talk to you, Mohammed, and ask you about, go back to a question that I asked you way before we started, which was, you started the Caribbean Equality Project. And I think for a lot of people who may not be familiar with the range, the now range of differences in the LGBTQ community in terms of gender identity, in terms of racial identity, in terms of country of origin, why it's important to have organizations that speak to those various differences and how that then intersects with the way that people understand and respond to violence.
Thank you. I just want to start by saying it was at AVP that I first realized that I can envision a world that's just, where all of my identities could be celebrated. And that was done through AVP's Speakers Bureau program. And there's a graduate in the room as well. And I learned how to be and become an activist from two trans women, two Black and brown trans women, and their names are Lala Zendale and Chanel Lopez. And if it wasn't for those women, I wouldn't be the person I am today, and the person and the community that I hope to create in the future, using the Caribbean Equality Project's work. I came to AVP in 2013 after my brother and I and my family survived a hate crime incident in Richmond Hill, Queens. My brother was hospitalized, and we didn't know where to go for support. And I knew of AVP work, but I also didn't know if they were able to address hate violence from a cultural perspective. In our incident, the words "Anti-Man" was used against my brother and I. And in the Caribbean, that's a derogatory word for a gay person. And when the police responded to that incident, they never reported it as a hate crime because they couldn't catalog the language. And at the time, New York City didn't have a way of cataloging cultural hate speech. And in terms of the cultural component, the cultural aspect of this conversation, New York City is home to the largest Caribbean population outside of the Caribbean islands. I'm Guyanese. I bring to this space an Indo-Caribbean identity, an endangered identity, a Muslim identity, a queer identity. And being an immigrant in this country, I didn't know if I could be my authentic self and be my queer self, where all of these identities were respected and celebrated and included in spaces like this. And from also being raised in Queens, I remember learning years later about Julio Rivera. And I remember how he inspired Danny Drum to create Queens Pride and why Queens Pride was actually founded. And today, Andy and I have marched so many years. We've been marching in Queens Pride just to uplift our Black and Brown, Caribbean and Latino identities, and our immigrant identities, and our trans identities. And if it wasn't for AVP, I wouldn't be able to envision an organization such as the Caribbean Equality Project that could fight for immigrant rights and fight for asylum seekers' rights and making sure that folks that are migrating to the US, when we talk about New York City being a sanctuary city, it also really means that we need to create space and create policies and create legislation that welcomes and affirms all of the immigrants that we are holding space for under this umbrella of a sanctuary city. And with the Caribbean Equality Project, AVP has played an instrumental role in supporting our community members. We refer almost 50 to 60% of our asylum seekers to AVP for legal support. And today, not one of those cases have been rejected. From 2017 to now, we have facilitated over 22 asylum seeker approvals in New York City. But the need for this conversation around culture and addressing cultural language, there are over probably 300 plus languages spoken in New York City. And how do we catalog hate speech through these languages? And how do we respond to hate violence in immigrant communities? And we also have to ask ourselves, are the NYPD trained to respond to these languages? And when officers are showing up, do they look like us? Do they represent us? Do they understand the history of violence that many of us have fled from, including parts of the Caribbean, to be in a sanctuary city? But oftentimes we are re-victimized and we are traumatized by the NYPD as they respond to protect us. Today, my brother is, through the support of AVP, is thriving, and one of the only Indo-Caribbean drag queens in New York City, Sundari the Indian Goddess. He's a performer, a dancer, and has been dancing for over 15 years. And I come from a family that It's very queer. I have 3 siblings. There are 4 of us. And out of the 4 of us, we have 1 hetero minority. And we tell her all the time, you are the minority and you will be voted out. But I want to say that, without spaces like this, in 2015, when I launched the Caribbean Equality Project with Andy Bishun and Krishna Ramsaran, this year we're celebrating 5 years of Caribbean LGBTQ liberation in New York City. And the work that we're doing wouldn't have been possible without the knowledge, the training, learning how to tell my story, how to tell the story of my community, building their leadership so they can tell their own stories, wouldn't be possible without an organization like the New York City Anti-Violence Project.
I just wanted to remind everyone as well that if you and as you have questions, to please write those down on cards. And then at the end of this particular phase of the discussion, we will ask for those cards and ask for questions. So on that vein, in terms of the ideas that we need to take us forward in terms of creating the type of society where we all want to live in, where ABP is a thing of the past, where it's anachronistic, where everyone here on this panel can be put out of a job. I wanted to get a sense from you in sort of the last part of our panel, working our way down this way, some of your key ideas for what you believe we should be emphasizing in terms of as a solution and solutions for how we go. And so I'm particularly interested in what your perspective might be, and having seen a variety of responses since the 1970s to violence, and what you think works well, and moving forward what we ought to be emphasizing.
Well, despite the fact that one is tempted to abandon anti-violence as a philosophy in this country, given the assholes that are out there marching around against us, I have to say that because I find myself personally feeling so much rage and walking around. I didn't think I could get angrier than I was in the 80s, than I was in the 70s. I really didn't think that was possible because I walked around in fury all my life, but I think I got pacified in the 90s and the 2000s and under Obama. I lulled into a sense of it's going to be all right, and I'm furious again. So, but I haven't abandoned my principles yet. So solutions to me fall back to, the tripod of organizing, education, and political/policy work. Organizing, like Caribbean Equality, like Make the Road, neighborhood-based, working with people directly impacted in our communities to support, empower, work with, alongside, organize in every way possible. There's so much work to do. Organize for prevention. Education. I think about the data that I see coming out about really younger people being more anti-gay, anti-LGBTQ. I don't know if you've been following this. It's kind of sad. So I think our educational work should be aimed at 10-year-olds and elementary schools and young people through because if the mainstream message is this hateful white supremacist nationalist crap, what are the chances that young people are going to go, okay, well, that's norm, and I think it has to be refuted. And then policy and politics, it is all about power. Power. We need more power for all of our identities.
I just wanted to say one thing that occurred to me, which I really shouldn't comment after the responses, but I'm going to do that because I have a microphone. Which is that I was just in a really interesting conversation, which was about this very issue that you brought up about power, which is about how progressives have to get comfortable with the idea of power. That the other side is very comfortable with that. They understand that the way that our system is organized is around who controls it. And they figured out how to control it with a minority of people. And so the question is that for people who are in the majority who want to live in a different society, how we become comfortable with the idea of power, getting it and using it and exercising it in a way that's going to build the world that we want to live in. And so it's about figuring out how to move from an idea of constantly feeling marginalized to how we coalesce to seize power, which is a conversation that we need to start having.
Regarding solutions, I think, speaking from an immigrant lens, I think healing, we need to start there. I think mental health is so important for folks who have survived trauma and for them to heal from it. And immigrant folks don't necessarily come to a sanctuary city to just escape violence. We also come here to heal from that violence. And we're not healing from our own violence, we're healing from ancestral trauma and ancestral violence against our Black and brown bodies. And I think for communities of color in particular, having access to culturally competent mental health care is essential. I also feel that having services that are catered to us and created for us and by us to lead our communities are important as well. And I also think larger organizations in New York City needs to redistribute some of their financial wealth to organizations such as Make the Road and the Caribbean Equality Project so we can thrive and have a more sustainable future so we can do the work as well. And in terms of creating spaces are being created. Many of us are leading those spaces now. It didn't necessarily look like us 40 years ago. Thankfully, through ABP work and other organizations in New York City, we are rising up to take up space. And by taking up space, we're creating our own power in those dynamics. I also feel that, like right now, looking at the work that's ahead of us, political power is really important. I'm so proud to be able to celebrate every queer and trans person that are like taking up space in Albany and in Washington. We get to celebrate that because that's what liberation looks like for us. 20, 30 years ago, it didn't. And this idea of what power looks like and how we redefine power, we get to decide that. We get to decide what power looks like in our communities because we also are responding to violence in different ways. We are meeting our community where they are. And some of our community members don't want to respond or don't want to report their violence because it also means that they're going to be outed. And it also means that their economic status, their housing status is going to be challenged. And for many immigrants, and for many particularly Caribbean immigrants, our family are at the foundation of who we are. And losing that means jeopardize our safety, means that we sometimes turn to resources and support that is not meant to support us, or we're not created to support our communities. And then we end up in shelters, and we end up in very dangerous and risky situations. So I think like an analysis in terms of what the future looks like for our community is needed, but also how larger nonprofits in New York City can redistribute some of their financial resources to smaller groups is also essential.
Para mí, resoluciones como una persona trans, como nuevamente dije y documentada, es tener más servicios legales para las personas que están recientemente llegando. La policía necesita más entrenamientos de cómo lidiar con las personas que se identifican queer, trans, pero también tenemos que tener educación para las personas trans, porque hasta el momento hay muy pocas personas que se identifican como trans o queer, que están terminando alguna carrera importante.
Alright. Yep.
For me, I find resolutions to be for a trans, as a trans undocumented person, is a need for more legal services. Also for people that recently come into the country, and training, education for the police that do not know how to treat or deal with undocumented queer or trans people. There is a need for education as well for trans people. There are very few people that are trans might not identify as trans people.
Crear visibilidad, conciencia. Un ejemplo, hace 8 años empezamos con la Trans Latino March. Un grupo de 50 personas, mujeres trans, marchando por Jackson Heights para demandar justicia en igualdad social. El año pasado tuvimos más de 500 personas que se unieron a la marcha. Thank you. Y no solamente habían personas trans, pero lo más bonito y que me hizo sentir muy feliz y bienvenida al área es que iban madres con sus hijos en las carriolas, llevándolas con letreros diciendo yo apoyo a las trans. Esa es la visibilidad que realmente necesitamos crear como comunidad. Y lo empezamos a hacer ahora, empezamos hace 50 años. Poco a poco vamos a hacer conciencia y visibilidad en nuestras propias comunidades.
Eight years ago, the Trans Latino March began. It began first with a group of 50 members. 50 members. And it was for the fight for equality. And most recently, it has grown to 500 people have joined the march. And it has not only been a trans people part of this march, but I think what made me very, very happy to see is seeing mothers walking with their strollers and with signs saying that they support the movement. And I think that's what we need, more visibility. And we know that, and I know that little by little, this more visibility will be created over time.
So at ADP, one of the things that we've been working on over the past year that I feel really excited about is coming together with other organizations and folks across identity and citywide to form a coalition. It's called NYC Against Hate. And it's ADP and 8 other organizations. There's actually a postcard in the packet that you all got on your seats. We're planning a Day Against Hate coming on February 13th to kick off some of the work that we're doing together. And what's really powerful about this group is that it's folks across many different identities coming together to put forward a proactive vision of what resisting hate looks like in our city. And we're kicking off with this Day Against Hate that is a day of bystander and upstander intervention trainings to teach New Yorkers how to safely intervene in incidents that they see happening on subways, on the streets, and in other spaces that we all share together. And so that's one of the key pieces, that education piece that we think is really vital to responding to and resisting hate. And we've talked a lot today about responses to hate violence, and we think that as communities it's really important for us to figure out ways not just to respond when hate happens, but to create networks of communities and create education so that we are preventing hate incidents before they happen, and that In addition to that, also collecting data and doing documentation of what's going on is really vital, and as well as building up the practice of transformative justice. So dealing with incidents when they happen inside our communities and in ways that do not involve carceral systems. And that's something that we are really struggling together to figure out how to do, and we think is a really important piece of how we move into the next phase of things that will hopefully all put us out of jobs, because as community members we will be able to do this work together and not have to rely on systems to do it for us.
Well, join me in thanking this amazing team. We are going to move now into the question and answer part of our particular discussion. So we have lots of questions, so we're going to treat this like a lightning round. So if you can try to keep your responses, everyone, to a minute or two, that would be fantastic, because then we can get through this giant stack that we have. And then I'm going to just, instead of having all of us sort of answer at once or at once, or all in the same question, I'm going to direct it to one particular person, but then whomever that is, I just encourage you again to be as brief as possible so that we can get through this stack that we have. So this I will direct to actually you, Adesia. So are there any plans to educate the NYPD or to include training in handling LGBTQ hate crimes?
Yeah, you can also talk to this. Training the NYPD is something that ADP used to do very, very, very proactively. And it's something that we have deprioritized as one of the practices that we use. So we still believe that it's important that while a police force exists, that they need to be less awful. But it's no longer our high priority to focus on working with police.
So basically, as Make the Road here, also we used to do trainings when we started working on Make the Road, but I really don't call training. Talking with 30 officers, and we try to share our experiences being trans, walking outside, and it was most like a conversation and not as a training. Because when we finished the conversation, we used to tell them, do you have any questions? And they say, no. So we decided to not continue doing like that type of conversations with police, because we're seeing that when we finish the conversation at nighttime, they make raids to the transgender community in Jackson Heights, so that means that doesn't work. That's why we stopped.
I just want to add to that. I think it's important to have access to how the NYPD collect data on hate crimes. And currently in New York State, many of us don't necessarily have access to those reports. We don't necessarily know what they're writing, what they're cataloging as a hate crime. And I think that's really important for particularly urban communities. It's important to document the language that's being used. Some of it is actually hate speech, and that also needs to be cataloged from a cultural perspective in order for us to elevate those instances from just assault to a hate crime.
Great. Actually, one thing that you said, Danny, is that if you have any questions there, but Tino Shade, members of the New York Police Department, asked trans women questions on Grindr. One thing I wanted to say is someone from the audience had a comment, and that was that Julio Rivera was beaten to death in the Queens schoolyard in the early 1990s and was pivotal to AVP street marches, advocacy, etc. Please remember him. For you, Billy, as a trans woman of color, what are some tools and methods I can use better to encourage cis people in an effort to encourage them to become allies and advocates for trans and non-binary people?
Para mí precisamente yo creo que personas que se identifican como cisgénero tienen que apoyar un poquito más. Es lo que estaba teniendo una conversación hace rato con Andy, que es mi compañero de trabajo. Muchas de las personas que se identifican como hombres trans, una vez que terminan su proceso ya se desaparecen, ya no apoyan el movimiento trans, cuando en realidad vemos a muchas mujeres trans que están sufriendo en la calle, no tienen un empleo, tienen que hacer sexo servicio para sobrevivir. El año pasado tuvimos 25 personas asesinadas por violencia en Estados Unidos, y realmente es muy triste ver que la comunidad que se identifica como hombres trans no están o desaparecen básicamente. Por eso es que me gusta siempre compartir, estoy bastante enferma, ayer estaba con una fiebre horrible, pero es importante hablar sobre estos temas, de que la violencia hacia las personas de color, específicamente mujeres trans, es real y que nos está matando. Y qué más bonito que verlos a ustedes, estar aquí apoyando este panel. Para mí es bastante.
For me, and particularly, I believe that people that identify with cis have to support a little bit more. I had a conversation with a colleague of mine and about folks that identify as male trans folks, and we were talking about how once they finish transitioning, they disappear and are not as involved in the movement. I think there needs to be more support for trans women. There are many trans women out there not employed, have to do sex work, and just last year, 25 people, trans people, were murdered in the United States. And unfortunately, we see that trans men are not as present in the movement. I think it's very important to put the focus and recognize that the violence is mostly on trans women of color in particular. I think this may be a good one for you, Arthur, which is, what advice do you have for younger LGBTQ people who may have been privileged enough not to have ever experienced violence?
I think two things. One is to be aware of the privilege and accept it. You know, it's not going to go away very soon. And redistribute it and find a way that is comfortable and sustainable for you to get involved, to help, and to realize, I mean, there was something that was said like how, the question was asked, how can a trans person talk to a cis person? we with privilege have the responsibility to deal with other people with privilege. It's not a responsibility, it's not, as queer people, it is not our responsibility to re-educate straight people. As citizens, it is not our responsibility to re-educate the police. It is our responsibility to say that it is necessary that they be re-educated. But those communities are going to have to find ways, and we are perfectly willing to help, to provide information and all of that, but it is not our responsibility. But on my experience of 40 years of being in and out of the movement is to find ways that you enjoy, that are sustainable, that fit with your particular mode, whether you're a frontline person or like me, an organizational person, and accept that it takes a village, it takes people with all kinds of abilities and perspectives and strategies. And don't worry about what the next person is doing and what the best thing is and what the perfect thing is, but just do something.
And I think what in the same focus, Arthur, that if you have privilege, use it, but for good.
This will be for you, Bev. The city recently launched an office that focuses on preventing and responding to hate crimes and hate violence. What do you think this office should do to combat violence?
So many things. We'll be working with you all. You know, first of all, you know, one of the things that we say at ABP, which I can't stress enough, is that when we talk about hate violence, we actually mean hate violence. And we're not using hate crimes because there is a range of violence that our communities are experiencing that do not fit under the hate crimes legislation definition and are never going to be dealt with right now unless our government changes laws and definitions. They are not recognizing state violence as hate violence. They're not recognizing a lot of the violence that people come to us having experienced as anything that they're going to do much about. And so one is, let's broaden this conversation about what is violence and how are our community members experiencing violence. Let's elevate that conversation first. Secondly, there are so many people in communities across this city who don't feel listened to, have not been asked what needs to happen, who have been ignored. And so, you know, listen. Talk to as many people as you can in the community, as diverse a swath of people in our community, and find out directly from people in the community what they need, and then figure out how to help make that happen.
And I think this may be jump ball, but maybe we can start with Dorothy and then maybe Bev, which is part of gaining power is through the vote, yet our community is not fully engaged and many do not vote. What's the response to that, and what can ABP do? And I think this is really important. I don't know if anyone has seen recent reports, but it's that 1 out of 4 LGBTQ people is not registered to vote in this country, and that if actually all of them were registered and all of them voted, Donald Trump would not be president. That they have figured that out statistically. So we can actually save ourselves in this election, which is not a part of the conversation. So I don't know if you want to start there.
No, I think you just answered that the best way, which is that, I mean, it feels ineffectual, but it really isn't. And it's an urgent and imperative thing that every person who's able to do that should do, and that we should broaden the franchise so that more people can vote, and that the restrictions and the barriers are reduced, and there's so much that can be done. And it would transform local, state, and national elections if a whole different circle of people or circles of people actually showed up than who do show up right now. It's just a fact, you know, and we gotta believe. We got to believe. Now, of course, they can declare martial law tomorrow, and then we're in a different situation. I'm kind of pessimistic enough to worry that that might happen, but I fundamentally believe we have power as individuals and as a collective and as communities and as movements and as constituencies. There's different ways that we slice ourselves and bind ourselves, and that we are bound to each other, and we have power in those relationships with each other. My whole life has been about seeing the evidence of that, of movements making things happen. So we're a movement, we're part of a movement still, or movements, and we are making things happen. So I think that's the larger context of voting. And then if I may, just, I don't know, I see it's 2-minute warning here. I think this deeper question that we're all grappling with is the question of what does a nonviolent society look like? You know? And we're anti-violence, but then there is a beyond violence. Like, what is that where that interpersonal and power over and dominating and abusive violence that so many of us have experienced and continue to experience from multiple actors, family, state, church, whatever, you know, stranger, when that becomes lessened or gone, that is a profound thing. And I struggle with myself around imagining, is that possible? It's so utopian, Gandhian, you know. Like I said earlier, I'm really in conflict about that, but I think it's important to hold on to that ideal, and I treasure AVP and the founders for having that desire to see beyond the violence and do something.
Yeah, I saw a quote earlier today, which said that the current system that we live in seems impenetrable and that it will never change, but once upon a time, so did the divine right of kings. Right? Like, things can change and move. And one thing about voting before AVP's role in helping us save ourselves from voting is the fact is that the gag about voting, right, is that they convince you that your vote doesn't matter while they all show up in the polls, right, and seize power. So a part of convincing people that you're powerless is a part of the way in which people who are opposed to who we are maintain control. And secondly, you know, all of us who can vote and who have the ability to vote, we need to vote, and we need to show up for people like BNA and for people like Muhammad and other people that we know who can't. That's our responsibility. I wanted you to answer the question, then I'll say something, and then you say something, and we're done.
You know, I can't say it much better than what Urvashi said. I have been thinking about this question in terms of our work at AVP. And one of the things I do think is that we often in our movements talk very lofty and in the abstract, and we just don't break things down for people enough. And so when you think about violence and the level of violence in the last election season alone that we saw across the country, and then think about if we could change the dynamic so that the people who are inciting and encouraging hate and violence no longer have that pulpit. that's all you really need, right? We need to talk to people about real change that they can imagine happening, the real impact of voting. And I can think of probably 10 different examples, and we just need to break it down to people very clearly, because I think a lot of times people think it feels so distant. My vote and actual change. And I think at least now, maybe we've always had it, but certainly now around violence, we have really clear examples about what we can see happening differently in this country about state violence towards the LGBTQ community, right? Our queer community is under attack. What more do we need to know about why we should be voting and why our vote counts? Just to reverse all the things that have happened in the last few years alone, for starters.
Yeah, we're under attack by the state, right? We're attacked by the government. I just wanted to close out by saying that, first of all, to thank everyone for the tremendous courage that you've all displayed in your lives in various ways, which is how you got up here and how we are all here. I feel deeply appreciative of that and that example. I also wanted to say that I think that for me, as a board member, that I think that the role of ABP and the goal of ABP is not only to eliminate violence, but the causes of violence. And I think that that's one of the reasons why we settled on the tagline for the 40th anniversary, which is "A Just World is Our Calling," because justice is the way that we end violence. It has to be as much of our consideration as the tactics that everyone up here works and puts their lives on the line, literally in some cases, to enact, is for us to think about how we do integrate that lens of justice in ourselves, in our work, and in our world, because that's the way that we'll actually put ABP out of business.
Thank you. So I want to just close out. We have some more time that we can be in this space, so I encourage people to talk to the panelists, talk to each other, share ideas. This is a great group of folks to meet if you haven't met folks already. Thank you again to all the panelists. A huge thank you to Squarespace for opening up this beautiful space for us, providing food, drinks, and being so welcoming. So everyone who's here from Squarespace, we really appreciate this. We could not have done this without your generosity. And I want to remind everyone, as you're walking around and mingling, take out your folder. Look for the form in your folder where you can sign up to join our 40th anniversary committee. There's room for everyone. If you are willing to make any kind of contribution to help make our 40th great over the next year and a half, we want you involved, so please do that. And if you can, fill out the form to make a pledge. We are inviting people to make a generous pledge to our 40th anniversary goal that can be paid out over the next 2 years, so you've got some time. And we also want to remind you, #AJustWorld. And in the back is a board, 2 boards, where we want you to share with us your ideas about the future of our work. So thank you all for being here and being a part of this conversation. And let's talk more and do more.
We are the New York City Anti-Violence Project. We are a community of survivors, advocates, counselors, organizers. We are LGBTQ, HIV affected, and allies. 40 years ago, we came together to respond to biased and violent attacks against our community members, to support each other, and to organize. We connected to survivors through a single landline, then pagers, then mobile phones. Throughout our history, we have fought to hold those who harm accountable and push those with power to see us, hear us, believe us, and serve us. We have gathered to heal, and we have grown. Now, our bilingual hotline runs 24 hours a day, and through new technology, we connect to survivors in over 200 languages. With your support, we will reach even more survivors through every means possible. We know that the violence that impacts us comes from outside of and within our communities. We recognize that institutions that dehumanize us will not bring about justice, and everyone has the right to heal and feel safe. Today, those who attack us are emboldened. They want to build more walls, construct more cages, push more and more of us to the margins, and divide our communities. Yet at the Anti-Violence Project, we are opening doors and growing stronger. We are building a different future, free from hate and violence. A just world is our calling.